Mitsubishi J8M. The Mitsubishi J8M Shūsui, Japanese, Sanling J8M Shūsui, literally autumn water, used as a poetic term meaning sharp sword deriving from the swishing sound of a sword, was a Japanese World War II rocket-powered interceptor aircraft closely based on the German Messerschmitt Me 163 Komet. Built as a joint project for both the Navy and the Army Air Services, it was designated J8M Navy and Ki-200 Army. Design and development. The J8M was intended to be a license-built copy of the Messerschmitt Me 163 Komet. Difficulties in shipping an example to Japan meant that the aircraft eventually had to be reverse-engineered from a flight operations manual and other limited documentation. A single prototype was tested before the end of World War II. The Japanese were aware of the results of the strategic bombing of Germany and knew that the B-29 Superfortress would be bombing Japan and the resultant problems which would arise from trying to combat this. Japanese military attaches had become aware of the Komet during a visit to the Bad Swischen airfield of Erprobungskommando 16, the Luftwaffe evaluation squadron charged with service test of the revolutionary rocket-propelled interceptor. They negotiated the rights to license produce the aircraft and its Walter HWK-509, a rocket engine. The engine license alone cost the Japanese 20 million Reichsmarks, equivalent to 74 million 2017 euros. The agreement was for Germany to provide the following by spring 1944: complete blueprints of the Me 163B Komet and the HWK-509 engine, one complete Komet, 2 sets of sub-assemblies and components, 3 complete HWK-509 engines. Inform Japan of any improvements and developments of the Komet. Allow the Japanese to study the manufacturing processes for both the Komet and the engine. Allow the Japanese to study Luftwaffe operational procedures for the Komet. The broken-down aircraft and engine were sent to Kobe, Japan in early 1944. It is probable that the airframe was on the Japanese submarine RO-501 XU-1224, which left Kiel, Germany on 30 March 1944 and was sunk in the mid-Atlantic on 13 May 1944 by the hunter-killer group based on the escort carrier USS Bog. Plans and engines were on the Japanese submarine I-29, which left Lorient, France on 16 April 1944 and arrived in Singapore on 14 July 1944, later sunk by the submarine USS Sawfish on 26 July 1944 near the Philippines after leaving Singapore. The Japanese decided to attempt to copy the Me 163 using a basic instructional manual on the Komet in the hands of Naval Mission Member Commander Aichi Iwaya, who had traveled to Singapore in the I-29 and flown on to Japan when the submarine docked. From its inception, the project was a joint Imperial Japanese Army Air Service JAF/Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service JNAF venture. The JAF wanted a new design to be drawn up. The JNAF, on the other hand, felt the design should mimic the German Komet because it had already proven to be a stable aerodynamic body. It was the JNAF which won and issued the 19 specification in July 1944 for the design of the rocket-powered defense fighter. The contract went to Mitsubishi J8M, which would produce both the JNAF version, the J8M Shūsui, and the JAF version Ki-200. The project was headed by Mijiro Takahashi. The JAF, however, decided to undertake their own design to meet the 19 specifications, working at their Rikugun Kokujijitsu Kenkyujo JAF Aerotechnical Institute in secret. At the first Naval Air Technical Arsenal in Yokosuka, in association with Mitsubishi and Yokosuka Arsenal, work began to adapt the Walter HWK 509 engine to Japanese manufacturing capabilities and techniques. This was also where efforts were underway to produce a glider version of the J8M to provide handling data. While working on this glider, the MX-8 Akigusa Kyūkau Autumn Grass Mitsubishi completed a mock-up of the J8M in September 1944. Both the JOF and JNAF approved its design and construction. A prototype was built. In December 1944, the MX-8 was completed and, on 8 December 1944, at the Hyakurigahara airfield, Lieutenant Commander Toyohiko Inuzuka took the controls of the MX-8. Once in the air, Inuzuka found the MX-8 almost perfectly emulated the handling characteristics of the Komet. 2 additional MX-8 gliders were constructed in the naval yard at Yokosuka, one being delivered to the Rikugun Kokyu Jujutsu Kenkyujo JOF Aerotechnical Institute at Takakawa for evaluation. The JNAF initiated the construction of another prototype. This was to use water ballast to simulate the weight of an operational J8M complete with engine and weapons. This variant was to be built by Mita Aircraft Institute, while the JOF version was to be constructed by Yokoi Koku Keikei Aircraft Co. The JNAF also proposed a more advanced trainer, designated the MX-09 Shuka Kyūhyuo Autumn Fire, which would be powered by a 2K and 450 lbf thrust Su-11 ducted fan engine. The war, however, ended before this model could be built. Mitsubishi and partners Nissan and Fuji proceeded with development of the airframe, and Yokosuka Arsenal was adapting the engine for Japanese production, designated the RO. 2. The Japanese succeeded in producing prototypes that outwardly looked very much similar to the Komet. The J8M had a wet weight that was 400 kg 880 lb lighter, the aircraft having a plywood main spar and wooden vertical tail. The designers had also dispensed with the armored glass in the cockpit, and the aircraft carried less ammunition and slightly less fuel. The Ki-200 and the J8M differed only in minor items, but the most obvious difference was the JOF's Ki-200 was armed with 230 mm 1.18 Type 5 cannon with a rate of fire of 450 rounds per minute and a muzzle velocity of 720 m/s 2400 ft/s, while the J8M was armed with 230 mm 1.18 in Ho 105 cannon, rate of fire 400 rounds per minute, muzzle velocity 750 m/s 2500 ft/s. The Ho 105 was the lighter of the two, and both offered a higher velocity than the Mk 108 cannon of the Me 163, whose muzzle velocity was 520 m/s 1700 ft/s. The Toko Ro 2KR-10 rocket motor did not offer the same thrust rating as the original, and Mitsubishi calculated that the lighter weight of the J8M would not offset this. Performance would not be as good as that of the Komet, but was still substantial. The engine used the German propellants of T-Stoff oxidizer and C-Stoff fuel hydrogen peroxide/methanol hydrazine, known in Japan as Ko and Otsu respectively. A total of 60 of the training version Ku-13, Ki-13, MXY-8, MXY-9 were produced by Yokosuka, Yokoi, and Mita. 7 of the operational version J8M/Ki-200 were built by Mitsubishi. Operational history. On 8 January 1945, one of the 2 J8M prototypes was towed aloft, water ballast added in place of the fuel tank and rocket engine to test its aerodynamics. The test flights confirmed the design. Training courses for JOF and JNAF pilots began on the Ku-53 glider, which shared a similar configuration to the J8M. The 312th Naval Air Group was selected to operate the first J8M. Mitsubishi Fuji Hikoki and Nissan Jidosha all had tooling for mass production well into the advanced stages, ready to produce both the J8M and the J8M2 variant, which differed from the J8M in sacrificing one of the Type 5 cannon for a small increase in fuel capacity. The first J8M prototype to be equipped with the Toko Ro 2KR-10 was ready in June 1945. They were then transferred from the Nagoya plant to Yakoku for final checks before powered flight testing, after final glide tests with the engine installed. The J8M took to the air for its first powered flight on 7 July 1945, with Lieutenant Commander Toyohiko Inuzuka at the controls. After his sharp start rocket-powered takeoff, Inuzuka successfully jettisoned the dolly upon becoming airborne and began to gain speed, climbing skywards at a 45° angle. At an altitude of 400 and 1300 ft, the engine stopped abruptly and the J8M stalled. Inuzuka managed to glide the aircraft back, but clipped a small building at the edge of the airfield while trying to land, causing the aircraft to burst into flames. Inuzuka died the next day. While Mitsubishi and naval technicians sought to find the cause of the accident, all future flights were grounded. The engine cutout had occurred because the angle of climb, coupled with the fuel tanks being half-filled for this first flight, caused a shifting of the fuel, which in turn caused an auto cutout device to activate because of an airlock in the fuel line. Requests to continue flight testing were denied pending the modification of the fuel pumps in the aircraft. The 6th and 7th prototypes were to be fitted with the modified Ro 2 engine. Full-scale production readiness was almost at hand, and component construction was already underway. Flight testing was to resume, despite another explosion of the fuel mixture during a ground test days after the crash, in late August 1945, and the J8M2 design was finalized. But on 15 August 1945, the war ended for the Japanese and all work on the J8M ceased. The end of the war also spelled the end of the JAF's Kai 202 Shūsui Kai modified Shūsui, whose design had begun in secret months before. Kai 202 was to offer improved flight endurance over the Kai 200 and was slated to be the priority fighter for the JAF in 1946, but no metal was cut before Japan's surrender. Germany tried to send another Komet in U-864, but the submarine was sunk near Bergen by British submarine HMS Venturer in February 1945. With many other Japanese fighter types combating air raids over Japan, the Kai 200 was considered for use in ramming attacks against B-29s. The envisioned mission profile was to make 1 or 2 firing passes and then, with the remaining energy, conduct a ramming attack. Any fuel left on board would most likely detonate, increasing the effectiveness of the attack, but also meaning the pilot had little chance of survival. Nevertheless, the cost was deemed to be worth it, and plans were being drawn up to form a Hagakure-Tai Special Attack Unit. Variants: Kai 200. An interceptor variant for the Ajaz, almost identical to the ANA's J8M. J8M. J8M2 Shūsui Model 21. Long-range version for Navy, identical to J8M, armament reduced to a single 30 mm 1.18 in cannon. J8M3 Shūsui Model 22 Rikagun Kai 202 Shūsui Kai. Long-range version for Army and Navy, with fuselage and wingspan lengthened to 7. 10 M23 FT3 in and 9. 75 M32 FT0 in respectively. Powered by 19. 6K and 4,410 lbf Tokuro 3, Projected maximum speed 900 km/h 560 mph. Yokosuka MXY8 Ikigusa Yakoiku 13. Training glider using J8M airframe for Navy and Army. Yokosuka MXY9 Shuga. Training version using J8M airframe, powered by Tsu-11 thermojet engine. Operators: Japan Imperial Japanese Army Air Service, Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service. Survivors: in November 1945, 2 aircraft were taken from Yokosuka to the United States for evaluation aboard USS Barnes. FE-300/T-2-300 USA Ident Japanese Ident 403 is now exhibited at the Plains of Fame Museum in Chino, California. The other was at NAS Glenview in October 1946, identity unknown, but was scrapped. In the 1960s, a nearly complete but badly damaged fuselage was discovered in a cave in Japan. This was on display at a Japanese Air Self-Defense Force base near Gifu until 1999, when it was restored and completed by Mitsubishi for display in the company's internal Kamaki Plant Museum. Gallery. Comparative Specifications.